It says here something about value in the Bible regardless of belief.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
What I wanted to clarify that when I say value in the Bible, I'm talking from like literary value, philosophical value, that kind of thing.
By the way, there's some kind of effect, I think, which may even be on our board that's
Sounds like he's in a can.
Yeah, I'm in a cave or a theater. Okay.
But I can hear you.
So go ahead, James.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's got better.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. My phone's a piece of crap. Yeah. So when I talk about the value in the Bible, regardless of whether you believe it, I think there's value within the Bible from the literary standpoint, from the larger philosophical stance. Whether you believe it or not, it's obviously got a major impact in society and so forth. I would argue it has values similar to value of all mythological works, literary works, and that sort of thing.
Sure. What difference does that make?
Well, I mean, I would argue that the Bible is important for that, and
I agree that I have no problem with the idea that the Bible has had literary and social impact because people have read it and shared it and believed things in it and found things that were significant for their life. So what? I mean, that's true of a lot of books.
Were you just calling to make that point?
Well, I mean, first of all, I want to say that this is a subject I've been trying to study more extensively in recent weeks. I just think that even for atheists, that there's a lot worth looking into the Bible for. And the same thing for like the Quran and all these other books. A lot more.
For what reason?
Surely for the philosophical questions it raises.
Why would I need to read the Bible to learn anything about philosophical issues? Why couldn't I just, study philosophy?
Well, I mean, for an example, I would assume that you have mostly Christians on the theist side calling in the show, right?
Yeah.
And so I think in order for the betterment of the discussion, for the betterment of commonality and so forth, it helps to have the Bible as a frame of reference for those discussions.
Sure, but that's, okay, this is the thing. As somebody who is a fundamentalist Christian and was going to be a pastor, I've read it, I've studied it, I've taught it, I know it, hell, I know it probably better than a good many of the callers who come in here. That benefits the discussion. But what I'm asking is, let's say that there was the Big Book of Poop. Reading that Big Book of Poop would be useful if I was debating people who believed that the Big Book of Poop was real and gave them good information. But the issue is, does the Big Book of Poop actually provide any useful information apart from those discussions?
To give an example, I suppose, take the Noah's Ark story. We'll just use that for an example. Regardless of whether we accept that to be factually true or not, and for the sake of the argument, let's say that it's not true.
I'll buy that.
I actually believe that too. I don't believe it's factually true, but
sure. What benefit do we get out of the Noah's Ark story?
Well, I would argue that it serves as an excellent reference point story to illustrate some important issues such as protection of the earth, protection of wide species, possibly a good allegory to use for the issue of global warming, which is a huge issue that needs to be taken care of. I would argue that using that story in that context is wildly beneficial.
Okay, so a fictional story about a god destroying and killing everything except for a family and a boat full of animals, don't you think we could? I mean, you got to kind of twist it to make this about preserving the earth and animals and talking about global warming.
I guess it would.
Why can't we just teach those things without the Noah story?
Well, I mean, you probably could, but
couldn't you actually do it better without the Noah story? Why wouldn't it be better to give factual, actual information rather than using a fictional account that really doesn't have anything to do with preserving the earth if the goal of God was to destroy pretty much everything on the earth?
Well, unfortunately, not every single person's going to buy the factual argument. So for some people, you have to reach them with the best possible thing that would reach them.
Okay. Well, the problem is that you're pointing to a book that says that the earth is yours to subdue and make your own. You're pointing to a book that has Jesus coming back, and this is why a lot of fundamentalists don't accept climate change, don't accept the very idea that we could do damage to the planet and actually destroy it, because God already has a plan and he's going to come back for us before that could happen.
That's what they taught in my church, and they were very literalist.
Yeah. So wouldn't it be better to just, I mean, if there are people for whom facts are not going to be persuasive, I don't think it's a good idea to start lying to them by twisting stories.
Well, I wasn't trying to suggest lying to them.
Well, you don't believe the Noah story is true, right?
Right.
So you're going to tell them a story that you don't believe is true, which isn't about climate change and it isn't about preserving the earth, and you're going to try to convince them that it is. I would say that's lying.
Well, I wasn't trying to say that. I wasn't trying to convince them that it is true. I was trying to suggest just using it to illustrate a point.
Well, for me, what you're doing, it doesn't illustrate that point. It's like me using the story of Jeffrey Dahmer killing a bunch of people as a way of encouraging people to love their neighbor and be peaceful. I mean, it's almost the exact opposite. God's trying to destroy everything, right? Except for one family and a bunch. Yeah. So I don't see any value in teaching the Noah account at all.
All right. Well, okay. You make an excellent point. I guess I didn't fully think that through. That was just a thought that I was.
So is there something about the Bible that you find valuable? I mean, your point here is, even if you don't believe it, the Bible can be valuable for teaching things. The question is, what is it that the Bible can teach better than some other method? What is it that we need the Bible for in order to be most effective at communicating an idea?
Well, within the context of studying various religious myths for what they speak to the human condition and the human belief system, the various things that make us human, our collective consciousness, and so forth. Purely from that level, I would think that the Bible has something to teach us about what it is that makes us human, and what it is why we believe these various things. And so
that doesn't even come close to answering the question. The question is, what is it that the Bible can teach better, or that requires the Bible in order to teach most effectively? First of all, I don't buy into this idea of a collective consciousness. But if we're going to learn about the human condition, why on earth would we rely on a book, an ancient book, from people who didn't have a good understanding, or as good of an understanding about the human condition as we have now? I mean, what's wrong with a good sociology course?
Well, I mean, the Bible is important, is an important sociological document, wouldn't you think?
It's good for studying the history of people who believe that stuff.
Right.
But what does it teach us that's of value?
Well, it's a good early document for showing the early thought process of like loving thy neighbor and these sorts of ideas that unfortunately are also blended in with some horrible stuff that's also in the Bible. But I would argue that there's some good early threads of like love thy neighbor, don't bear false witness, those types of things.
What difference does it make if it's early? Can't you just teach those lessons without the Bible?
I suppose you can.
Okay, so what do we need the Bible for?
Well, within that context, I guess you don't.
Cool.
It was just I guess within that you don't really need the Bible. I'll grant you that. That was a good point.
Well, I'm glad we agree. We don't need the Bible.
Right.
So one thing to think about is, with the understanding that we don't actually need the Bible, I mean, your purpose for calling in was to talk about value in the Bible. And with the recognition that we can find value in almost anything, I can find good, moral lessons in a Harry Potter book, or I can find out interesting things about the human condition, good and bad, by reading Dostoevsky or whoever, Shakespeare. Might be worth thinking about, why were you even looking for a way to add value to a book which has so much objectionable content, when anything good could be achieved without that book?
Well, first, when you mentioned Shakespeare, you mentioned like the Harry Potter books and so forth. Many of these writers, especially writers within Shakespeare's time and so forth, they drew inspiration from biblical stuff and so forth.
Well, that's about drawing inspiration from the archetypes of stories that human beings have been telling forever.
I would say Harry Potter draws more from Tolkien and from actual European mythology than it does from the Bible. There's so much more pulled from that.
But the thing it's drawing from, even if you could say this drew from the Bible, it's the Bible has drawn from those things too, because these are about human interactions. There's a reason why we have the superhero, archetype, and the mythological hero, and the journey and the quest for discovery. There's nothing about the Bible that I find is significant in any of this. It's just another example.
Right, it is just another example. I think that its value only exists in the fact that it is a cultural perspective based on, there's a time span there, so there's multiple cultures represented, but it is a cultural representation of their view of what was valuable, of what was correct, the way that they viewed humans and their place in the cosmos. And so you have that point, right? Like you have, let's just imagine that we've got this graph, and they are one point on this graph, and then every other culture is going to be a point on the graph as well. And at the end of the day, it's good to have the comprehensive bunch of points on that graph so that you can kind of compare and contrast, like what things do we have in common culturally as people, and where do we differ culturally as people, and why do we have those differences, and what causes those commonalities? What is it about us as human beings that makes it so common among cultures that we view this, and very different aspects of how we view this? That makes it relevant because it is a record of what these people valued, albeit not an unaltered record. So for what we can look at, it speaks to, and like Matt is saying, one example. And it may just be one example, but with the many examples, then we can derive information about ourselves from that. But I do agree with Matt that as far as like a specific example, I don't know that it stands out beyond other examples.
I think it's far more valuable to have a comparative religions course than a course on the Bible.
Well, yeah, I actually agree with that. And Tracie, what you had brought up about I want to make sure I understand what you were saying, right? The cultural points in the Bible, cultural points within the Bible, what the culture thought from a cultural perspective, and so forth. I agree with that. That's actually, I'm not the most vocally articulate person, so please forgive me, but that's kind of like where I was trying to go along with my argument.
That's why I didn't say anything up front, because I didn't want to put words in your mouth. I feel like what you were describing is not what I would have been arguing as far as the value of the books. Right,
and like I said, I tried writing out various points in my argument and so forth. I'm far better at writing it out than articulating it vocally, so please forgive me. But
sure. But on that note, James, there's a bunch of other callers waiting, and since we seem to be in agreement that the Bible isn't, that valuable apart from learning what people believed and why, potentially, I think we're going to go on to another call.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. I'll have a good one.
Sure, thank you.
Thanks.